Let's talk money.
I don't have your money.
I know I'd be a lot happier with some extra cash.
Is this about money?
Obviously, this is all about money.
Oh, man, we got bills to pay, buddy.
With practical tips and a focus on scripture, let's talk money. With Dave and Reb. From More Than Enough. Real conversations about money for real people. Let's talk money.
Are you ready to talk money, Reb?
I'm ready to talk money.
Well, that's really great. It is like the end of the year. We are on the cusp of a new year.
I can't believe it.
I was just going to say, and I can almost remember the show we did last year at this time and going, okay, so having that conversation.
I don't remember.
And the year has just blown by.
We did an end of the year show.
Of course we did.
Okay, we always do.
Yes. Okay. Anyways, welcome to 2023. Not quite, almost there.
We're glancing back. Dave used that word glance. Yeah. I say we're looking more than just a glance. We're actually staring our year in the face and what happened.
Well, when we were talking about a little bit of this show, the idea or the picture in my mind was, so often we think about moving forward and it's like looking out the front window of the car and you can see, what's ahead and that's really great. But there are times as we're driving that we want to look in the rearview mirror and we don't want to stay there. But when we look in the rearview mirror, often it's about, we want to see kind of what happened or what is happening behind us or, there's something that we're looking for. And so as we talked about this show, that's really, as we glance back, I'm like, so what are we looking for? Are we going to think of all of the terrible things that happened last year?
Well, my question to myself was, do we even have to talk about 2022?
So exactly, right?
Yes,
where are we gravitating towards? Right?
Yes.
Are we going to pick up on all of the good things? And we'll say, okay, I'm just going to focus on the good things. Or are we going to focus on the bad things? Or are we going to do a mix?
We have had this conversation. We're way ahead of ourselves. So if you want to look back at all the radio shows we did, you can go to Let's Talk Money with Dave and Reb on our YouTube channel. You can go to notmine.ca, chri.ca, morethanenough.ca, and any of the podcasting platforms that are out there. So that's where you find the big glance backward. But we were talking
back at our shows.
Yeah, glance back at our shows, which we're going to talk a little bit about today because I want to hear from you about what your favorites were and all that. So we're going to do a mix because Dave and I are a bit of a mix. We actually had this discussion this morning about positive attitudes and how long do you let yourself dwell on the negative? Because if you've read my book or you've heard me before, we've got to lament. We can't complain. And if you want to know my different definitions for both, there's complaining, but then there's lamenting. There's the mourning and the sorrow. I read this morning in Isaiah 61, he comforts those who mourn and he provides for those who grieve. So I needed to hear that this morning because I'm revisiting some griefs in my life this season. And how long can I stay there? I don't want to stay there for one, but being in God's presence, Dave said, what do you learn? What is Jesus teaching you these days? I said, well, it took me like an hour just to get through my own grieving this morning. So we feel these raw emotions that are hard. Right. And then there's Dave, who's like PMA ever since I met him, positive mental attitude. And I'm like, yeah, but sometimes your positive mental attitude doesn't welcome the negative. So you just skip across. So we have this discussion, been having it for 31 years. But saying that, we want to look back at the year with a positive mental attitude and with honesty. And we're going to talk about our podcast this year and some of the challenges we've had personally in a business. And we're going to see where the conversation goes this morning. Well,
and I think, again, the idea, if I'm just going to pick up, this glance backwards, there's certainly things we can learn, right? We can learn some things from glancing backwards, but, we don't want to necessarily keep driving the car, if I can use that metaphor, with the, looking through the rearview mirror. That's a little bit of a recipe for disaster.
And there's scripture that Paul says, run the race set before you, not looking back and running forward. But we look back to learn. We look back to remember God's...
I like that. Look back to learn.
Look back to learn. Maybe we should call the show that instead of a glance backwards.
I like, because that's exactly what I had the feeling as we were talking about this. I'm like, I don't want to discount the fact that looking back doesn't have value. That's not at all what I'm thinking. But I love that looking back to learn, where we can go, what can we learn from 2022? When I look back at maybe it's the last month or the last 12 months, we'll just say the last 12 months. If I can do that from the perspective of I'm looking back to learn, well, that just gets me going, right? That's like, oh yeah, okay.
So you can tell,
I do want to look back.
you can tell we've had this discussion about how long do you stay in the lamenting, or what do you need in lamenting, and how much positive, because there's a tendency, which we talk about too. Sometimes they're like, we're just going to look back and just focus on the positive. But sometimes we need to face the hard things so that we can move on. And it is a part of learning. It is a part of learning who God is. It is remembering who God, like we look back to learn, we look back to remember, because in Psalm 107, which was some of the scriptures I was focused on this morning when I was thinking about the show, was it says this: "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His mercy endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from the hand of the enemy and gathered out of the lands, from the east and from the west and from the north and from the south. They wandered in the wilderness in a desolate way. They found no city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted in them. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them out of their distress. And he led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city for a dwelling place." Now, this chapter goes on for 43 verses. It is a looking back chapter. There's a theme in there, and it's repeated. One of my Bibles I've had in the past, that has fallen apart, and Dave won't let me bring it now. I shouldn't say it like that, but
I won't let her bring it. We have to, I don't know how you hold a Bible where there's like 18 pieces to it and it's kind of thread all together.
Okay, so in that version, I have it underlined. I have it if you're on YouTube, you can see the binding on this one's even done. Anyway, it says they cried out to the Lord. I have it underlined. And they cried out to the Lord, and he delivered them. They cried out to the Lord, and he delivered them. And I want to remember crying out to the Lord this year and remembering his deliverance, remembering his answered prayer. Remember maybe some of the prayers that are not yet answered. Remember my own lamenting, and how did God meet me in the places of sorrow?
Sure.
But so I just want to encourage you all with those verses, that he is a God who comforts those who mourn, and he provides for those who grieve in Zion. I just love those verses today. And if you needed to hear them, I hope they encourage you on this last show of our year. But
and again, how many times through Scripture didn't the Lord say to the Israelite nation, remember this? I mean, I think most of the Jewish feasts that we would participate in if we were Jewish would be a remembrance of the Lord's deliverance, a remembrance of
the Passover.
And you think about that, okay, that's a remembrance of the Lord's deliverance, but it is also, we can remember the state of slavery that the Israelites were in Egypt, and that deliverance was a whole process. So when we say that, it's the whole package, right? And so again, the encouragement of the Lord is to, yes, we want to look back and we want to remember, and the commands really are, and remember my faithfulness as I delivered you from the hand of Pharaoh, and remember my faithfulness as you came into the promised land. So we're not
just remembering. I remember our pastor many years ago, he had preached a sermon about not staying at the grave. Sometimes when we have a loss or a hard thing, we just park ourselves there and we stay there and we keep going back to it. But it doesn't bring us any hope or freedom. We don't learn what we need to learn to propel us forward. So that's just what I'm remembering. So as we remember, so what did we learn from our podcast in 2022? I want to ask Dave this to see if he remembered. I went through the list of all the things that we learned together on our podcast in 2022. Okay. Do you remember any? Oh. Dave actually couldn't remember many.
I actually have my favorite thing about And again, you sparked that with the learning part. Is I was thinking, well, I love this guest, and I love what this guest said, and we always have a great conversation when Ray is on, and we're learning. And then I thought, well, I love the guests, the things that I learn, both in preparation as we talk to the guests, but also just as we learn about the guests and the different topics, and so that. I can't pick up my favorite podcast, which was what you asked me. Like, what is your favorite podcast? And I'm like, I think my favorite podcasts are the ones where we have guests, and I just love learning from their experience.
And that's a great answer. I was like, if you listen to us regularly, we had Dr. Bethan, I was going to call her maiden name because she's my sister-in-law, Dr. Bethan Van Oppen, and she talked about ADHD and financial health.
That was a good one.
That was a good one. We've had Brent Vandermeer on. We've had
Dr. Stephen Brown.
Yeah, Dr. Steve Brown from Arrow Entrepreneurs. But we also have had just recently Bold Carré, and talking about cryptocurrency, which is a big learning thing for me. We talked, I'm just scrolling through, if you see me on my phone, all my list. I have a list of all the shows.
Well, and again, we had Ray Borg from Financial Discipleship Canada on almost every month. We have Ray on, and we were really not great
about having him monthly. I think we hit him every 2 months or every 3. So we'll see what happens in the coming year. But we talked about mortgages and rates and inflation. We talked about all that stuff. One of the dearest ones to me was when I had my childhood friend, Pat Gross, who lost her husband, went through cancer, lost her dad, talk about the need for wills. And if you need to hear that, please go back. That was on July 22nd, so you can go find her. That was really important. If you don't have a will, go back and just. And
then we had Dr. Rebecca Southerns on talking about adaptability.
Adaptability quotient. And coming out of COVID, how able are we to adapt, and then adapting in our finances, and adapting at work, adapting in our homes. And we have often referenced that adaptability, and we see it in our work environment, but we see it in our house. Actually, I see I come to Dave and say my adaptability quotient is 0 today. So just FYI, don't throw anything new at me. Yeah.
Yeah,
he still does.
That's been a great tool, right? Like again, that's something that we learned from Dr. Rebecca was just how to navigate that, even in our language and our communication together. And for me, that was a significant part of looking at our team and actually asking the question of our team. How is your adaptability quotient? How are you feeling as we're navigating all of the changes that are going on in the more than enough world that we live in? So
we also did a show that you named it. It was the litmus test show to how to take a look and understand whether your finances are healthy. That was a lot of fun. I learned some stuff from you again. Just sometimes how we communicate. We talk a lot about money in our life and how to talk about money. So I always love a new way to package it. So that was really good for me. There was one other one I was thinking of, and
we're both kind of looking at it last year here.
Yeah, what we did. There was a lot of conversation and questions from our listeners and from our clients at More Than Enough Financial about. There's a lot of fear and concern, and how do we move forward? And I don't even know if we've answered those questions well in 2022, other than as Christians to focus. Where is our focus? Are we trusting the Lord in the midst of it all? And do we have a plan? What we do at More Than Enough and what we try to emulate in our life is there's a spiritual dynamic of learning, growing close to the Lord, walking intimately with Him, and listening and learning to listen to His voice in our lives. And then then asking Him the question, how do we do that practically? How do we apply the principles of God to our finances? And I think after all these years, we're still learning that. So do you think 2022 was a good year for the Canadian family financially?
Well,
or shouldn't I ask it like that?
Again, I think when I look back, just as a quick glance, and I go, kind of what's the feeling I get? It was all about change. There were just so many things changing in the financial world where, we started the year with this sense of a little bit of uncertainty when it came to, are we in COVID? Are we out of COVID? Are we done this thing or not?
We're
right?
still not done it, really.
And, are there going to still be lockdowns? Are there not going to be lockdowns? And how's that going to affect the economy? So I remember, looking all the way back to last January going, there's still lots of uncertainty.
Weren't we locked down in January a little bit?
We were, and then there were kind of yes and no, and and I think through the year, some of those things have been kind of clarified. Again, there doesn't seem to be any talk about any more lockdowns. The economy is starting to but in the midst of that, we had changes in inflation. We had changes in
you didn't end your sentence about what the economy was doing.
Yeah, we're not gonna. We don't know. Well, today we know what it's doing, but tomorrow could be a different answer. So, but in all of those things, I think the my overarching as I glance back is man, it's just been a lot of change, and there's been a lot of. This is why I think I come to the end of the year and I think, man, like it just blew by. It just went fast, and I think that's because we were always dealing with another change or another conversation or another something like that. So maybe that's.
Yeah, it's good. I wanted to ask you. I'm going to ask you a personal question, and then and a part of that maybe together is what have you seen the Lord teach you? What is some good things that you've learned, as you've looked back and learned? I mean, we're talking about the podcast and all the things we've learned practically, even spiritually, and then how has God used that this year in your life?
Yeah, so for me personally, I think there's been, in all of the change, it has pushed me maybe into a little bit more of my entrepreneurial spirit where I'm looking ahead and I'm looking at the organization at More Than Enough, and I'm thinking about, how are we going to adapt to some of these changes, but also going, how do we build a strong foundation in our relationship, yours and mine, Reb, in the relationship that we have with our family, and then looking at that and going, and how are we going to build that and build on that strong foundation? That's a better way to say it. Build on the strong foundation that we have in those relationships and at work, because God has given us strong foundations in a lot of areas. And so I've really been looking at it again, okay, Lord, what are you doing as we move through these changes, and I will say tests, of our what we're doing. Let's say at work, there's been some tests around, okay, so how are we going to plan for the future when there's so many changes? What do you do that? Well, again, it's pushed me into deeper prayer. It's pushed me into asking the Lord to live in today and trusting that what He says for me to do today, that if I just do that thing, then that's fine.
That's enough.
And that's been a really big personal place where I've been, where I've just said, I can trust the Lord for 2023 if I just listen to what He's saying to me today.
But that reminds me of what Henry Nouwen talks about, and in the readings I've done, he was a priest. He's passed away now, but he had a real intimate relationship with the Lord. And I mentioned in the book I wrote last year, Cultivating Trust, that if we take, Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. I'm thinking of the King James Version in my head. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Anyway,
that's still a valid version.
I know.
By the way. Just saying.
It was just running through my head. But one of the things that Henry Nouwen teaches or has taught in his writings is that when you take care of what you need to today with the Lord, it prepares the way for tomorrow. So we don't have to worry about tomorrow. When we focus on what needs taken care of today, then that lays foundation for tomorrow. And And also we can trust God for our tomorrow. So there's that piece, but I really love that. That has been a COVID teaching for me that has carried me through this year. One of the things that, you exemplify to me is, just obedience today. And that's something that I've tried to adapt, but I'm also trying to realize, because I'm a list checker, and God's really been speaking to me at the end of this year about being in the process, enjoying the process. And it's absolutely impossible for us to redo the process of how we intake coaching clients at More Than Enough in one day. It is a thing that happens over time, and we keep learning, we keep asking better questions, we keep resolving some things, we throw some stuff away, and that happens over time. But can I actually enjoy the process? Can I actually enjoy the process of Serena writing her essay or her book report or whatever it is, and not get to the end yet? Right? It's just being and I think that's one of the good things that God's been teaching me this year. I love, and I think that's building on a foundation of Christ, that he holds it all. He holds me. He holds everything that I've been called to. And I've just really appreciated that encouragement from the Lord. I'm not really great at it yet, but of
course it takes practice, right?
Yes. I feel like I'm over 50 and I'm like, really? It's taken me this long to even hear the Lord say this to me? And it's more than just about being in the moment. It's a deeper place and digging deeper in and understanding he is present in my moments. Like, it's not just me living in the moment. It's being in the moment with Christ. And he gives a whole different perspective. He gives a different focus. And that part's really wonderful.
And again, going back to that, looking back to learn, right? Again, when we do that, then we can go, oh, wow, like, I can actually see some of the journey. I can actually see some of the ways that, again, as we've just discussed, some of the things we learned even just in the podcast here as we've been doing it. But as we look at that in our finances, it's important to go, how much, I'm just going to take a little side note here, how much I love planning. Right. So I'm a huge, let's look ahead. Let's plan the expenses for the next week, the next month, whatever, but in that planning, we also are trusting. In that planning, we're trusting. Right. And so as we look back to learn, what did I learn about managing money in 2022? I'm not even going to throw that question on you, Rebecca. But what did I learn?
That we need to,
and maybe I'm asking the listeners. Hey, I'm going to throw that out to the listeners.
You want us to be honest about our money now?
Yeah. So when you look back at 2022 and you look back to learn, what did you learn in 2022 about how you interact with money, or how you something that you learned about money? I think that's a great question.
Right. So why don't we answer that?
Okay.
Why don't we answer that
Go
personally?
ahead.
No, I'm asking you first.
Go ahead.
What did you learn about money in 2022?
I don't know. That's why I wanted you to ask first.
This isn't good coming from a financial coach.
Well,
okay, what did I learn? At the end of this year, as the prices have shifted and changed, and as rising costs, I have been reminded of the importance of the spending plan and talking weekly with you about those details.
Oh, good. Because you know what? I was just thinking it's the basics. So I learned the basics again.
Again, we've learned so this is why, and it's not a confession, but you guys know that in our area, in the Ottawa area, mortgages and housing and rental, like everything went crazy in the real estate market in COVID. Mm-hmm. So Dave and Renata in our office were swamped. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen Dave so tired as I have. I've seen him more tired this year as he's come off of the previous 2 years. Mm. So I would manage our finances then, which isn't what we teach, but I would send him a weekly email, paid this. We'd have financial discussions, but we weren't navigating the nitty gritty details because honestly, David didn't have capacity. And we've taught about that on the podcast before. What happens when one partner can't manage it? Well, the other one tries to do their best to do it and keep the other informed. That's the basic principle. But now we have capacity together to navigate it together, and we're going back to the basics. And if we can encourage you all, face your finances, get a spending plan, and not an app. Not
follow a spending plan.
Follow. So make one and follow it, but give every dollar a name. Sometimes those apps from the banks don't give the dollars a name, and it tells you in retrospect what you've spent. You want to be planning forward. Yes. And as we reflect back, we want to encourage you to go through the basics again.
Yeah. So as we look back to learn, right? As we're looking back to learn, it also then gives us a perspective that we can look forward, and we can say, I love if it worked, like what worked last year? What am I going to, if it worked, then let's go back to keep that working. Let's, again, sometimes something worked and for some reason you just stop and you're like, wait a minute, why did we stop that? Okay, well, this is a looking back to learn moment. And we can go, we were doing really well in communicating and have our financial dates in early 2022, and somehow that dropped off. And this is a looking back to learn moment where we can go, let's go back to the things that actually worked.
Or maybe you've had a coach in the past and it was really helpful and you dropped off. Come back, get the accountability. It doesn't have to be our office. It can be anywhere that you have been helped financially. Find the community to talk about money and keep moving forward in 2023.
Yeah. Well, why don't you pray?
Okay. Well, Lord, we are grateful for the year that you've given us. We are grateful for your faithfulness. As Dave has said to me, and it's just stuck to me, you have been faithful to yourself. You are faithful. You're faithful to yourself, to who you are. And we get the benefit of that faithfulness. Lord, we just give you praise and glory. And we ask that you would help us move forward, looking back to learn and moving forward in 2023.
Yeah. And I'll just say this, join us next year when we talk money.
Let's Talk Money is a division of More Than Enough Financial Fitness, where God is transforming hearts and bringing hope for today and freedom for tomorrow. For more information or to comment on today's show, please visit morethanenough.ca.